Disturbingly, people go missing without a trace every single year. But with cameras everywhere these days, sometimes these lost people are recorded days or even moments before vanishing. These are the terrifying last recordings of people before they vanished without a trace. Amber Takaro was an Aboriginal woman from Fort McMurray, Alberta, who went missing in August of 2010. She'd flown to Edmonton with her son and a friend for a road trip. She was last seen hitchhiking with an unidentified man, and during that ride, she got a phone call that's become one of the most important pieces of evidence in this case. In the recording, you hear Amber questioning the driver about where they're going, and you hear the voice of the male driver reassuring her that he's taking her where she wants to go. Sadly, that would not be the case.
Yo, where are we going? Taking me anywhere I don't want to go. I want to go into the city. Jeez. Yo, we're not going into the city, are we?
2 years later, her remains were found by horseback riders in a field in a rural area. Until this day, we don't know the identity of the driver, who was very likely the man responsible for killing. But back to 2010, when she was first reported missing. The investigation was handled in the worst way possible. They dismissed her concerns, saying she was probably just out partying. They didn't start investigating until a month later, and it took 4 months for them to carry out any interviews. The RCMP also removed her from the missing persons list and failed to follow up with her travel companion. They even lost crucial evidence when they accidentally destroyed a suitcase belonging to Amber. The whole thing is just absolutely frustrating. All the RCMP did was, a Canadian sorry, after Amber turned out to be just a really sickening case. On the night of August 8, 2013, Brandon Lawson had an argument with his girlfriend Ladessa at their home in San Angelo, Texas. He left the home around midnight, and at 12:30 a.m. he called his brother Kyle to say he'd run out of gas on a desolate stretch of highway. During the call, Brandon sounded panicked, claiming that 3 men were chasing him out of town. He sounded irrational and paranoid, and Kyle was concerned, especially since Brandon had a history with substances. He'd been clean for 6 months, but Kyle suspected Brandon may have used again that night. Then Brandon called 911. His call was confusing. He mentioned being in a field and said someone was chasing him. Take a listen to some of it. The call is tough to make sense of. Brandon is obviously panicked and out of breath. From the sounds of it though, he was being chased into the woods by a few guys after running out of gas and possibly running into them with his vehicle. Some people say they can faintly make out other men's voices in the recording and the sounds of a firearm going off. Just a few minutes after this 911 call, a trucker called in to report Brandon's abandoned truck, parked haphazardly on the side of the road. Kyle arrived at the scene shortly after, trying to reach his brother, who claimed that he could see them but was injured and that they needed to hurry to find him. Brandon was nowhere to be found though, and no sign of him turned up for years. It wasn't until February of 2022 that a search party found clothing believing to be his near where he went missing, as well as unidentified human remains. The remains have yet to be confirmed as Brandon's, but it's highly likely they belong to him. As for what happened that night though, no one really knows. This video was taken by a woman named Susan Powell, about a year and a half before she went missing in 2009. In the video, she shows some property damage caused by her husband, Joshua Powell, and documents some of their assets. Her attorney had instructed Susan to film the video. Susan's marriage had been on a downward spiral. Joshua was not only controlling, but was in a bad way financially, having filed for bankruptcy in 2007 and declaring over $200,000 in debts. It seemed as if Susan knew Joshua was capable of something serious though. Oh, as a secret will she'd written, found later, contained the statement, "I want it documented that there is extreme turmoil in our marriage. If I die, it may not be an accident, even if it looks like one." And whatever happened certainly was not an accident. Susan Powell was reported missing on December 7th of 2009. Joshua Powell returned home with his 2 young sons after a camping trip in December and told police that Susan had stayed home and that he had no idea where she was. Now, this case is very frustrating. There are far too many details to get into in such a short amount of time, but let's just say that there was a mountain of evidence that Joshua was responsible for his wife's disappearance. Not only did police find letters Susan wrote expressing fear for her life, but Joshua's sons claimed that Susan actually did come with them on this camping trip, but didn't come back with them. One had even drawn a picture at daycare with 3 people in a van, telling the carers, quote, "Mommy was in the trunk." And Susan's parents felt that Joshua just didn't seem all that alarmed about his wife's apparent disappearance. He did lose custody over his boys, and visits with them needed to be supervised. On February 5th, 2012, a social worker arrived at Joshua's home with his sons. As soon as they walked through the door, though, Joshua blocked the social worker from getting inside, locking the door. Moments later, the house exploded, killing all 3 inside. Henry McCabe went missing in September of 2015. On the night of September 7th of that year, his wife, Karine, received a call from him. It was the last time she'd hear his voice, and the call was very disturbing. The voicemail lasted about 2 minutes, and it sounded like an absolute nightmare. Most of the words are unintelligible. He also made strange, animalistic grunting noises. All Karine could make out was that Henry claimed that he might have been fired at. Karine managed to record part of the call, and the next day, she filed a missing persons report. The night of the incident, Henry had been out with friends at a club in Minnesota. His buddy William Kennedy dropped him off at a gas station at around 2 a.m. It was shortly after that Henry made the strange call to his wife. There was a massive search, but Henry was nowhere to be found. His bank accounts were inactive. The only thing known was that his phone was disconnected after that eerie voicemail. It wasn't until November 2nd, 2 months later, that a kayaker discovered Henry's body in Rush Lake, about 6 miles from where he'd last been seen. Strangely, there were no signs of injury, and the cause of death was never determined. To this day, the case remains open. This is footage of Kylen Louder, a social worker who went missing in 2014, soon after this surveillance footage was taken. In it, we see Kylen walking outside of her condo complex barefoot. She looks to be talking to someone, only we don't see anyone else on camera. Right before she was seen outside, she'd made a series of strange 911 calls. A little backstory: Kylen's family said she hadn't shown any signs of serious mental health issues throughout her entire life, although there had been some dark stuff that went on with the family. About 5 years prior to her disappearance, her brother Colton had uncle, receiving a 5-year prison sentence in 2009. Kylen had also been unemployed for over a year at the time of her disappearance, but her mother insisted she was in good spirits, actively updating her resume and applying for jobs. On the night of September 26th, 2014, Kylen made a call to 911, claiming that there was a fight happening in her condo's clubhouse. When the dispatcher asked about weapons, she mentioned firearms, but when police arrived, they found a wedding reception in progress. There was no signs of any fight. Everyone there confirmed that nothing unusual was happening. An hour later, Kylen called 911 again, but hung up before anyone could answer. When the police called her back, she sounded confused and had trouble remembering her address. She mentioned that her roommate thought she was delusional and paranoid. The following day, at 8:18 a.m., Kylen made her final call to police, insisting that there was an intruder in her home. Later that day, security cameras captured her outside her condo around 3:30 p.m., dressed in shorts, a tank top, and barefoot in the rain. This footage was the last known sighting of her. On December 7th, just over 9 weeks later, her body was discovered in the Jordan River, about 5 miles from her condo. The autopsy showed no signs of illicit substances in her system, and there were no signs of foul play. The case is still a complete mystery. Trevor Deely's disappearance in December of 2000 is still a complete mystery as well. On the night of December 7th, he attended a work Christmas party in Dublin. After celebrating at a few bars and a nightclub, he left a place called the Buck Whaleys around 3:25 a.m., heading home to his apartment. On his way home, Trevor stopped by his office to grab an umbrella and chat with a colleague. He even made a voicemail for a friend saying everything was fine and he'd talk tomorrow. CCTV footage showed Trevor speaking to an unidentified man dressed in black, outside the office. The man would become a person of interest, but he was never identified. CCTV footage can be pretty hard to make out sometimes even today, and this was 2000. It was hard to make out any discernible facial features. The last known sighting of Trevor was just after 4 a.m. when he was seen walking past another bank. Shortly after, another man dressed in black passed by, but police ruled him out as a suspect. He didn't appear to be the same guy from before. When Trevor didn't show up for work the next day, no one was really all that concerned at first. It had been a very late night the night before, but then he didn't show up on Monday. A search was launched, but days went by with any leads. Days turned into months, months turned into years, and here we are. We still don't know what happened to him that night. Tiffany Whiten was last seen on security camera at a Walmart. She was born in 1987 in Georgia. Unfortunately, she grew up to drop out of high school and struggled with addiction, but she tried to turn her life around, even entering rehab at one point. In September of 2013, though, Tiffany was living with her boyfriend Ashley Caudill and his daughter. On the night of September 12th, they went to a friend's house, and later that night, they found themselves at a Walmart around 1 a.m. Security cameras caught Tiffany and Caudill shopping, but it was clear she was acting erratically. After Caudill made his purchase, Tiffany attempted to shoplift some clothes. When loss prevention officers confronted her, she panicked, ditched her handbag, kicked off her flip-flops, and ran out of the store. That was the last anyone saw of her. Caudill claimed he looked for her, but didn't tell her family about her disappearance. And for weeks, her loved ones believed that she was probably just laying low. She'd been known to do that before. But as time went on and Tiffany hadn't reached out, they started getting worried. But it wasn't until January that her mother reported her missing, that 4 months after she was last seen. Unfortunately, though, there have been no solid leads in her case. Kenny Vich was an avid hiker and YouTuber known for his channel Snake Bit McGee. His channel had a small following, but a video called Cave Hike went on to gain millions of views for a very dark reason. Kenny Vich would go missing, never to be seen again. Now, this wasn't Kenny's last video, but it is his most significant on the channel. In it, he talks about a mysterious cave he found near Nellis Air Force Base in Area 51. The cave had a unique M shape and supposedly made his body vibrate. After some viewers encouraged him to search for the cave again, Kenny decided to embark on a 3-day solo hike to find the cave. Before heading out, he shared online that he was kind of nervous about this cave and even mentioned that it was the only cave he'd ever felt scared to enter. A commenter ominously warned him not to go back, saying, "If you find that cave entrance, don't go in. If you do, you won't get out." Well, sadly, Kenny went missing during his hike in late 2014 and has not been seen since. Many believe he likely died while exploring a cave, whether it was the M cave or another. There are other theories though. Given the cave's location is near Area 51 and the odd vibrations it was giving off, some think he might have found something that he wasn't supposed to see. Sadly though, we may not never know what truly happened to Kenny Vich.
Starting off our list today with a volcano selfie to die for. Literally. Earlier this week, a woman died in Indonesia while trying to take a photo on the edge of an active volcano, Mount Ijen in East Java, known for its iconic blue flames. The 31-year-old woman named Huang Lihong had joined her husband on a sunrise hiking tour of the volcano. When the pair reached the summit, she wanted to commemorate the moment, but before the picture could be snapped, Huang slipped and fell directly into the volcano's crater. She died on impact after falling 75 feet into the mouth of Ijen.
One time you should absolutely never take a selfie is while flying a plane, but that's exactly what happened in 2014, leading to the deaths of both men on board. On May 31st, 2014, a 29-year-old pilot named Amrital Singh was flying over Colorado with one passenger, a musician who'd been in town for a show. He'd been taking photos and selfies with his GoPro, which was found at the crash site. There didn't appear to be anything wrong with the plane, so it looked like he'd been distracted, leading to the accident. He likely developed spatial disorientation, lost control of the plane, which went into a stall and spun before crashing into a wheat field down below. On top of these selfie distractions, it looked like Singh hadn't been trained to deal with stalls. His logbooks also didn't show he'd been qualified to fly at night, with passengers.
Next up, we have a catty selfie that almost cost the life of a 30-year-old woman at an Arizona zoo. The incident took place in 2019 when the woman, whose name was not released by the zoo in an effort to protect her identity, decided to sneak inside the barrier of the jaguar cage in order to get a selfie. After making it past the barrier, the woman walked over to the small fence, which was now all that separated herself from the massive animal. As she raised up the arm holding her phone, her other arm was swiped by the jaguar and slashed almost right open. The woman can be seen in a video after the incident rolling around in extreme pain, screaming and crying as the zoo staff attempt to attend to her injuries. Luckily, the event didn't prove to be fatal, just incredibly painful. The woman did later reach out to the zoo and apologize for her actions and for the backlash the zoo had been receiving since the incident. I really hope she learned her lesson, because that whole situation could have gone way worse.
Texting and driving is bad enough, but taking a selfie while driving, that's pure recklessness. And in this case, it led to the death of an innocent cyclist. In August of 2014, Matthew Kelly Strand faced charges of negligent homicide in Steele County District Court after a tragic incident. The North Dakota Highway Patrol investigated a collision that resulted in the death of Lisa Knudsen, a cyclist from Portland. Strand had been distracted taking a selfie right before the collision. The selfie was taken at 6:48 p.m. and then analysis of his pickup truck's data showed that he veered over the fog line and rumble strip and failed to brake before colliding with Knudsen, who was riding her bike right ahead of him. Strand first claimed he was distracted by a nearby vehicle and people at a farm, but there was no real confirmation of this. He also admitted to deleting photos from his phone. In defense, Strand's mother argued that Knudsen had shared some responsibility, saying that she'd been biking in a lane instead of on the shoulder, which she deemed was a stupid place to cycle.
Next up, a young couple who took a fatal fall after attempting to capture an adventurous photograph for their Instagram feed. Meenakshi and Vishnu loved to travel, and they loved to document their travels as well, and their trip to Yosemite was no different. The couple climbed up to the top of Taft Point in the national park before setting up their tripod over the high cliff. The photo snapped, and then moments later the couple fell 800 feet down the steep side of the cliff. Their bodies were found days later after tourists had noticed their abandoned camera equipment and alerted the park authorities, who warned other park goers of the dangers of standing on the edges of cliffs in areas that experience such strong winds.
Next up, we have the grenade. In January of 2015, in the Ural Mountains of Russia, two hikers came across a grenade. They didn't know that it was still alive. The men decided to take a selfie posing with it, pin pulled out, and it went off, killing them instantly. The phone with the picture was left intact. But this isn't the only time someone has died in Russia trying to take a picture with unexploded ordnance, especially a grenade. In 2017, a man named Alexander Chechnik sent a picture to several friends of a grenade he was holding with the pin pulled out. The grenade ended up going off, taking out his entire lower body. Police suspected he'd done it as a stunt, planning to reinsert the pin, but just wasn't able to in time.
Next up, we have an incident that took place in 2018 involving a man, a camera, and a bear spotted on the side of the road. On his way home from a wedding, Prabhu Batara spotted an injured bear on the side of the road in India. He stopped the car and hopped out despite warnings of danger from his fellow passengers. Phone camera in hand, he cautiously approached the wounded animal. First mistake. He got closer until he was within arm's length of the animal. Second mistake. The bear struck Prabhu and a fight broke out between the two. At one point, a stray dog stepped in to protect the man from the bear, but it didn't help and Prabhu died before forest rangers could arrive at the scene. In a public statement released by one of the rangers, it was stated that the man had died on the spot, but that the bear was being treated for its injuries.
Alright, word to the wise, do not attempt to climb into animal enclosures at the zoo, especially not with lions, and especially not just to snap a picture of yourself. Yes, this is another animal case. This next story just happened in February of this year. A 38-year-old man at a zoo in India climbed over the fence around the lion enclosure in order to get a picture with the creatures, and guess what happened? He was immediately attacked by one of the lions and lost his life. The incident happened at a zoo in Andhra Pradesh. A worker had actually told the man not to climb the fence, but the guy tried anyway and made it over and into the enclosure this time. Before the caretaker had any time to react, one of the three lions, named Donglapur, pounced on the man and mauled him to death. Now, of course, this is a very unfortunate and sad case. I think the man was under the influence too, but still, I wouldn't think anyone would need to hear this, but apparently some need the reminder. Wild animals are dangerous. Don't invade on their space. Nothing good will come of it. And what sucks in situations like this is that the animals end up usually having to pay the price too, even though they're just defending themselves out of fear.
Next up, we have a 21-year-old man who died in Mexico City after attempting to capture an impressive snapshot. Prior to his death, Oscar Otero had been known to post photos to his Facebook, posing next to what he described as impressive items. But unfortunately for Oscar, in 2014, the impressive item he chose just so happened to be a loaded handheld weapon. After a long night of drinking with friends, he pulled out his camera and began posing with the item in the hopes of getting a cool photo for his Facebook feed. Okay, I'm sorry, but I would literally unfriend someone so fast if they posted something like that on their timeline. During his attempt to capture the image, Oscar was playing with ways to hold the weapon when all of a sudden it went off. A neighbor heard the sound and called police, who arrived on the scene while Oscar was still alive, but unfortunately on the way to the hospital, the young man did die of his injuries.
Some of the most common causes of death while taking selfies are falls, drowning, and accidents with trains. This next incident is one of the latter. A 22-year-old man in Serbia lost his life while attempting to recreate a scene from his favorite movie, Barking at the Stars. He had the idea of running in front of a train, aiming to beat it and be celebrated as a hero, mirroring a scene from the film. But as he dashed in front of the train, he also tried to take a selfie to capture the moment, and sadly the high-speed train struck him with full force. The impact was fatal and he was killed instantly. Michael J. Adams was an astronaut who flew the X-15 rocket plane, a cutting-edge aircraft at the time. His last flight was on November 15, 1967. He reached an altitude of 266,000 feet, but when the nose of the X-15 veered off course by 15 degrees as he descended, the aircraft went into a dangerous spin. It was chaotic, with the plane experiencing extreme forces, over 15 Gs vertically and 8 Gs laterally. Just 10 minutes after launch, Adams announced, "I'm in a spin," before the X-15 broke apart, killing him instantly. After the accident, search teams tried to recover evidence from the wreckage. The cockpit camera was retrieved, which recorded the flight, but the film inside was missing. Eventually it was found though, allowing the investigators to learn exactly what happened during his final moments. Final ILS-24 was the last radioed transmission sent by Elliot C. before he died in a tragic accident along with fellow NASA astronaut Charles Bassett. On February 28, 1966, an accident occurred at Lambert Field in St. Louis, Missouri. Elliot C. and Charles Bassett were on a routine training flight of a NASA Northrop T-38 Talon. C was piloting the jet, and Bassett was in the rear seat, while another T-38 carried their backup crew, Tom Stafford and Eugene Cernan. After taking off from Ellington Air Force Base in Texas, they ran into trouble as they approached St. Louis. They missed their landing marker and overshot the runway. C tried to land on the southwest runway. As he descended, the plane dropped too far left, and he activated the afterburner to gain altitude while turning right. Unfortunately, at 8:58 a.m., the jet crashed into the roof of McDonnell Aircraft's Building 101, where the Gemini spacecraft was being assembled. The T-38 lost its right wing and cartwheeled into a parking lot. Both astronauts died instantly from the impact. C was found ejected from the cockpit, still strapped to his seat. Bassett's body was discovered later in the building. The crash also injured 17 McDonnell employees. American test pilot Michael Alsbury died in 2014 during a test flight, his last words being "pitch up" moments before the accident. On October 31st, 2014, the VSS Enterprise, a Spaceship Two experimental space vehicle, crashed into the Mojave Desert. The flight, known as Powered Flight 4, was the first powered test in 9 months and aimed to test a new hybrid rocket engine using nylon fuel instead of rubber. The VSS Enterprise was piloted by Peter Seibold and co-piloted by Michael Alsbury. After being released from its carrier aircraft, VMS Eve, the spaceplane fired its engine as planned. Just 11 seconds into the flight, though, the Enterprise broke apart, creating a massive debris field stretching 35 miles. Witnesses reported seeing a parachute before the crash. Tragically, Alsbury was killed in the incident, while Seibold survived with serious injuries and was transported to a nearby hospital. Seibold managed to escape the wreckage and was parachuted to safety. It was a rare given the circumstances. He reported that the aircraft broke apart around him, but his parachute deployed automatically after he unbuckled his seat. In 1966, during the Gemini 8 mission, David Scott radioed to ground control after a seemingly successful dock, stating, quote, "Flight, we are docked. Yes, it's really a smoothie." Little did he and Neil Armstrong know that things were about to be the exact opposite of smooth. Gemini 8 was launched on March 16, 1966. It was going to be a historic flight, the first ever docking in space, where the Gemini spacecraft would link up with an Agena target vehicle. The plan was for astronauts David Scott and Neil Armstrong to spend 3 days in space doing experiments and a spacewalk. Well, shortly after docking, Scott and Armstrong noticed the spacecraft was starting to roll uncontrollably. Armstrong tried to stabilize using its thrusters, and it stopped for a moment, but then it started rolling again. Out of communication range with mission control, they had to make a quick decision. They realized that the high spin rate could damage the spacecraft or even cause the Agena to explode, so they undocked from it. But without the added weight of the Agena, the Gemini began to spin even faster. Unfortunately, they'd used up a lot of their re-entry fuel while stabilizing the spacecraft, so they had to cut the mission short and make an emergency landing. Scott later praised Armstrong, stating the guy was brilliant. He knew the system so well, he found the solution, he activated the solution under extreme circumstances. It was my lucky day to be flying with him. On July 16, 2013, Italian astronaut Luca Parmitano's spacewalk of the ISS was cut short when he reported that water was filling up his spacesuit. As he was working outside, water started leaking into his helmet. Total nightmare scenario. But not only was his helmet filling with water, but it was floating around and blocking his vision, made it hard to hear because of the weightlessness in space. Parmitano ended up spending just over an hour outside, making it one of the shortest spacewalks in ISS history. He later said, "I started going back to the airlock and the water kept trickling. It completely covered my eyes and my nose. It was really hard to see. I couldn't hear anything. It was really hard to communicate. I went back using just memory, basically going back to the airlock until I found it." Fortunately, he made it back inside the ISS safely, but the experience, understandably, left him pretty shaken. Charles Conrad famously described the Apollo 12 mission as, quote, "a small step for Neil, but a long one for me." And at no time was that more clear than when not one, but two lightning strikes hit the shuttle on takeoff. Terrifying. On November 14th, 1969, Apollo 12 launched from Kennedy Space Center at 11:22 a.m. Things were looking kinda ominous though. There were dark clouds overhead, heavy winds. I'd be uneasy getting on a plane in conditions like that, let alone a rocket heading to space. Just over 35 seconds into liftoff, the Saturn V rocket was struck by lightning, causing a voltage surge that knocked out all 3 fuel cells, leaving the spacecraft to run solely on its batteries, which weren't powerful enough for all the systems. And then a second lightning strike hit 52 seconds into takeoff, taking out what's called the 8-ball attitude indicator. They were worried that the lightning might have affected the command module's parachutes. It was too late to really do anything about it though, so they just kept that information from the crew. Luckily, in the end though, the parachutes deployed just fine, and the Apollo 12 mission was a success. Theodore Freeman was an American astronautical engineer and test pilot who became a NASA astronaut in 1963. Sadly, he was the first astronaut to lose his life when his T-38 jet crashed on October 31st, 1964. On that day, Freeman was flying back to Houston after some training in St. Louis. The flight was delayed thanks to fog, which turned out to be partially responsible for the accident. Now, as he approached Ellington Air Force Base, a flock of geese was reported in the area. One of these geese struck the left side air intake of his craft, causing the engine to flame out. With the engine out, Freeman tried to land on the runway but realized he was too low and might hit nearby military housing. So he banked away from the runway and prepared to eject. But unfortunately, because the jet was nosing down, he ejected nearly horizontally. His parachute failed to deploy in time, and he died on impact. Freeman knew the risks that came with being an astronaut though, and despite these risks, he was passionate for his work. To quote him, "We don't look on this as dangerous work. It's about the most fascinating job I could imagine. Too much pain. Do something please to kill the pain." These were the last words spoken by Valentine Bondarenko, a Soviet fighter pilot who was selected as a cosmonaut in 1960. March 23, 1961, he was on a 15-day endurance experiment inside a low-pressure altitude chamber in Moscow. The chamber had an atmosphere that was at least 50% oxygen, making it highly flammable. On the 10th day of this experiment, after finishing all his tasks for the day, Bondarenko removed some monitoring sensors from his body. Then he started using an alcohol-soaked cotton ball to clean his skin. He tossed it aside without thinking, and it happened to land on a hot plate he was using to brew tea. The cotton ignited, and when Bondarenko tried to put out the small fire with his sleeve, he caught on fire almost immediately. The chamber was under pressure, and it took nearly half an hour for a doctor to open the door to get to him. By the time help arrived though, Bondarenko had suffered severe burns over most of his body. He died from shock 16 hours after the accident. In honor of his contribution to space exploration though, a crater on the moon's far side was eventually named after him. On January 28, 1986, the Space Shuttle Challenger launched from Kennedy Space Center at 11:38 a.m. 58 seconds into flight, 9 puffs of smoke were spotted coming from the rear solid rocket booster. Cold temperatures had compromised the O-rings, which were meant to seal the joints, allowing hot gas to escape, causing damage to the craft. As Challenger continued its ascent, a flame burst through the joint of the booster, and just moments later, the right booster detached from Challenger, leading to a catastrophic explosion. Pilot Mike Smith's last recorded words were simply, "uh-oh," as the shuttle began to break apart. Debris scattered over the Atlantic Ocean. February 1st, 2003, the Columbia Space Shuttle, commanded by Rick Husband, was in the middle of its re-entry when it broke apart in the sky, killing everyone on board. The shuttle had sustained damage to its thermal protection system during its launch, which allowed superheated air to enter into the left wing, and this caused serious issues as the shuttle descended, leading to increased drag and loss of control. Around 8:53 a.m., the shuttle started shedding all this debris. By 8:58, the shuttle systems began reporting multiple failures. Just a minute later, communication with Columbia was abruptly lost. Rick Husband's last recorded words were a simple "Roger, before the connection cut off. Columbia broke apart in the atmosphere, resulting in the loss of all 7 crew. This was the last piece of audio taken from the soon-to-be crew of the Apollo 1 when a fire broke out, killing all 3 men. Just a heads up, this audio is pretty distressing. On January 27, 1967, the soon-to-be crew of the Apollo 1, Ed White, Roger Chaffee, and Gus Grissom were in the middle of a launch simulation. But things went terribly wrong, all thanks to an exposed wire. This test was crucial for preparing for their upcoming mission. They were fully suited up, strapped in, running through their checklist when Grissom noticed a strange smell. There was a brief hold in the countdown, but they couldn't pinpoint the source. They resumed their countdown, but just a few minutes later, a fire broke out. The astronauts' frantic voices were heard over the comm. Ed White yelled, "Fire!" Now, because of the design of the command module and the pure oxygen atmosphere, the flames spread incredibly fast. Ground crews rushed to help, but the thick smoke and toxic gases made it nearly impossible to reach the crew. It took several hours to recover their bodies, which were trapped in the melted materials. Uh-oh. 2 words you never want to hear during spaceflight. On January 28, 1986, the Space Shuttle Challenger launched from Kennedy Space Center at 11:38 a.m. It all seemed normal at first, but just 58 seconds into the flight, things took a turn. 9 puffs of smoke were spotted coming from the right solid rocket booster. The problem was that the cold temperatures had messed with the O-rings, which were supposed to seal the joints, and this allowed hot gas to escape, causing serious damage. As the shuttle continued its ascent, a flame broke through the joint of the booster. The crew, unaware of the situation, received a command to go at throttle up. Commander Francis Scobie responded with Roger at throttle up. That was the last communication from Challenger. Just moments later, the right booster detached from the shuttle. Pilot Mike Smith's last recorded words were simply, "Uh-oh." The shuttle began to break apart in a catastrophic explosion, scattering debris over the Atlantic Ocean at an altitude of 46,000 feet. The crew cabin, which stayed intact at first, experienced extreme forces during the breakup. Investigations later revealed that some crew members might have actually been conscious after the explosion, as personal oxygen packs had been activated. Rick Husband, the captain aboard the Columbia Space Shuttle, was in communication with ground control during re-entry. The last message they received from him was, quote, "Roger," before he was cut off. The Columbia disaster is one of the darkest moments in NASA's history. On February 1st of 2003, Columbia was set to re-enter the atmosphere after a successful mission. The crew, including 7 astronauts, was busy preparing for landing as the entry flight control team took their positions at mission control early that morning. Everything was going as planned until about 8:44 a.m. when Columbia re-entered the atmosphere at a staggering speed. Unfortunately, the shuttle had sustained damage to its thermal protection system during launch. This damage allowed superheated air to enter the left wing, which began melting the aluminum structure inside. As the shuttle continued to descend, the crew didn't notice that the left wing was losing control because of increased drag, and around 8:53 a.m. things started to go wrong. The shuttle shed pieces of debris, which ground observers saw as these bright flashes in the sky. By 8:58 a.m. the shuttle systems began reporting failures, and just moments later, at 8:59:32 exactly, the communication with Columbia was cut off. What followed was catastrophic. The shuttle broke apart in the atmosphere. All 7 crew members lost their lives. Investigations revealed that the crew had likely experienced a quick depressurization before they could take any protective measures. Houston, we've had a problem. No, I am not misquoting Jim Lovell there. This one is often misquoted, mainly because of the Apollo 13 movie. Apollo 13 is one of the most famous space missions, but not for the reasons everyone was hoping. It was launched on April 11th, 1970. And it started off on track, but about 56 hours into the mission, astronaut Jack Swigert switched on some fans in the oxygen tanks to get better pressure readings, and suddenly there was this loud bang, and power began to flicker. And that's when Swigert calmly reported, "Okay, Houston, we've had a problem here." Fellow astronaut Jim Lovell then repeated this, saying, "Houston, we've had a problem. We've had a main B bus undervolt," whatever that means, and this problem just escalated quickly. The crew realized they were losing oxygen and their power supply was failing. With 2 of their fuel cells out, they were in serious trouble, and the mission's goal shifted from landing on the moon to just getting everyone home alive. And the lunar module, Aquarius, became their lifeboat. They powered it up to preserve the little oxygen and electricity that they had left. As the crew was looping around the moon, NASA engineers worked frantically to kind of find solutions. It was a race against time, but miraculously the astronauts did make it back to Earth on April 17th, 1970, splashing down in the South Pacific. In 2003, Yang Liwei, the first Chinese astronaut ever to reach space during the Shenzhou 5 mission, reported this eerie knocking sound on his spaceship. While floating in the silence of space, he started hearing something unsettling, an eerie knocking sound. He described it as, quote, "someone knocking on the body of the spaceship, just like hitting an iron bucket with a wooden hammer." He went on to report that it neither came from outside nor inside the spaceship. He couldn't figure out where the sound was coming from. Curious and understandably a little freaked out, Yang peeked out of the porthole, hoping to figure out what was making this noise, but there was nothing. After returning to Earth, he even tried to recreate the sound, but there was no luck there either. I've always found this case very compelling, just the idea of floating around in space all alone and then hearing something you can't explain. That'd be terrifying. So what, or maybe even who, was knocking on the spacecraft? You'd think space would be silent since sound needs a medium to travel, like air or water. And some experts have said that if it was a knocking sound, something physical might have been hitting the spacecraft. As for what that may have been, who knows? Thank you. Tell everyone it happened. This was the last garbled message sent by astronaut Vladimir Komarov, who perished during the Soyuz 1 mission. On April 23, 1967, the Soviet Soyuz spacecraft was launched, carrying cosmonaut Vladimir Komarov. Things went wrong almost immediately. One of the solar panels failed to unfold, which meant there wasn't enough power for the spacecraft systems. By the time the capsule had completed 13 orbits, the automatic stabilization system was completely out, leaving the manual controls only partially working. And meanwhile, the crew of the Soyuz 2 was preparing for a rescue mission, planning to fix the solar panel, but thunderstorms at the launch site forced them to abort. Mission Control decided to bring Komarov back home after 18 orbits. As the capsule re-entered Earth's atmosphere though, Komarov communicated that everything seemed fine, stating the engine was running for 146 seconds. Everything is going fine, quote. But then the main parachute failed to deploy. Komarov tried to activate a reserve chute, but that got tangled. The descent module crashed down at around 140 kilometers per hour. Rescue teams arrived to find the capsule on its side, engulfed in flames, with molten metal dripping from it. It was clear that Komarov did not survive. They're on the moon watching us. These words were supposedly spoken by Neil Armstrong during his walk on the moon. Neil Armstrong made history when he walked on the moon. Of course, there are loads of conspiracy theories surrounding the moonwalk now, but here's one I hadn't ever heard of until today. After Armstrong landed, NASA supposedly lost transmission for about 2 minutes, and during this blackout, Armstrong allegedly sent a secret message saying, "These babies were huge, sir, enormous. Oh God, you wouldn't believe it. I'm telling you, there are other spacecraft out here, lined up on the far side of the crater's edge. They're on the moon, watching us." I don't know, this one's definitely dubious and it's hard to find other information about it, but hey, if he really did see some strange stuff up there, that would definitely be really cool. The 3 men aboard the Soyuz 11 remain the only astronauts ever to die while still in space. The mission was launched on June 6th of 1971, aiming to dock with the Salyut space station. The docking process was complex and took over 3 hours, and their mission lasted 22 days, during which time they carried out scientific experiments and live broadcasts. It was far from smooth sailing though. On day 11, a fire broke out in the station, which they fortunately managed to put out. On June 29th, the crew prepared for their return to Earth. Cosmonaut Vladislav Volkov joked with ground control to make sure they had cognac waiting for them down below. This would unfortunately be one of the last messages flight controllers received though. Soon after on docking from Salyut 1, radio communication went silent. When the capsule landed, rescue teams rushed to check on the crew, and unfortunately they found all 3 cosmonauts, Georgy Dobrovolsky, Viktor Patsayev, and Vladislav Volkov, dead in their seats. It turned out that a ventilation valve had opened during the separation, causing a rapid loss of cabin pressure. This was fatal in less than a minute. The autopsies revealed that they died from asphyxiation and hemorrhaging caused by the vacuum environment. You hear that? That whistling sound? Now, this quote from astronaut Gene Cernan may not be as disturbing as the others on this list. Not really disturbing at all, to be honest, but take a listen to what he's describing. This is audio from the Apollo 10 mission in 1969. Cernan was piloting the lunar module and described an odd whistling sound he was hearing to fellow astronauts John Young and Thomas Stafford. They sound pretty calm and content there. I would have been incredibly freaked out. You're already in space, now you're hearing a weird whistling noise. Is there something wrong with the ship? Is there an alien floating around? I don't know. I'd be pretty freaked out. Shoe leather. That's a quote from astronaut Alan Bean. Not all that terrifying on its own, but shoe leather was the description Bean gave about an odd shiny thing he spotted on the surface of the moon while in space. He had no idea what it was then, and still has no idea today. Neither does anyone else, but you can be damn sure there are some eerie conspiracy theories, mainly that it could be some remnant of alien technology. Are there more mundane explanations? Sure, but you're not really here for those now, are you? Now, this list has been pretty dark, so I thought I'd close out with another quote from Alan Bean, who passed away in 2018, but spent a lot of his final years painting and reminiscing about the incredible experiences he had as an astronaut. Alan Bean left something behind on the moon during the Apollo 12 mission in 1969. His silver astronaut lapel pin. In the years after the mission, he'd think about that pin often, saying, quote, "When I look at the moon at night, think about that pin up there, just as shiny as it ever was, and someday, maybe somebody will go pick it up." Lars Mittank was a 28-year-old from Germany vacationing with friends in Bulgaria in 2014. Things started off normal enough, but after a fight with some other tourists, Lars injured his ear and was told by a doctor that he couldn't fly. So his friends went home and he stayed behind alone. That's when his behavior started getting strange. He texted his mom to tell her that he was scared and felt like someone was following him. He also asked her to cancel his credit card. A few days later, he went to Varna Airport planning to catch a flight home, but during a routine checkup with the airport doctor, something spooked him. A construction worker reportedly entered the room and Lars panicked. He jumped up, ran out of the office, left his luggage behind. He was caught on security cameras sprinting through the terminal, out the doors, and into the nearby woods. As he fled, he reportedly shouted, "I don't want to die here. I have to get out of here." That was the last anyone ever saw of him. There are tons of online theories as to what happened here, everything from psychosis to kidnapping, but no trace of Lars has ever been found. On the night of November 9th, 1995, 21-year-old JoJo Dullard was hitchhiking back home to Callan, Ireland, after a day in Dublin. She missed her bus, so she started catching rides instead. By the time she reached the small village of Moon, it was getting late. She stepped into a phone booth to call a friend, and while they were talking, she casually ended the call with, "I have a lift," and that was it. JoJo hung up, got into a car with someone, but never made it home. Her backpack was found a few days later, but she was gone. No one came forward to say they picked her up. There were no major clues, no witnesses who could place her after the call. For years, this was a missing persons case, until it was officially reclassified as an unaliving investigation in 2020. But even now, police have no idea what really happened to her. But somewhere between that phone booth and her destination, JoJo disappeared. Brandon Swanson was 19 when he vanished on May 14th, 2008 in Minnesota. After a small end-of-semester party, he got in his car and started driving home late at night. Around 2 a.m., he called his parents to say he'd run off the road near Lind. He decided to walk toward what he thought were town lights. Stayed on the phone with his dad for almost an hour describing where he was. His father drove around, flashing his headlights, hoping Brandon would see him, but he never did. Then suddenly Brandon said, "Oh shh," and the line went dead. His phone stayed on for a few hours, but he never picked up again. Authorities later found his car near another town, not Lind, over 20 miles away from where he thought he was. Till this day, there's been no sign of him. Just his car abandoned in the middle of nowhere. Michael McLean, a social worker, was out at a club in New Hampshire on April 20th of 2019. A fight broke out and Mike reportedly tried to de-escalate it. Then at around 2 a.m. he calls his boss and he leaves a frantic voicemail. "They're after me," he says. More than one. No one's entirely sure who they were or why he thought he was being followed. Mike's phone last pinged near a McDonald's just a few blocks away from the club, and a few witnesses claimed that they saw him nearby, but he didn't go home, he didn't show up for work, he stopped posting on social media, his bank cards were never used again. There were no obvious signs of a struggle though, and no confirmed sightings after that night. Investigators have never been able to figure out what scared Mike so much or who he was referring to. Did it have something to do with the altercation at the club, or was it something else entirely? On January 26th of 2017, 58-year-old Will Sirzan was having a completely normal afternoon at home in Santa Clarita, California. He watched golf with his nephew, chatted for a bit, and later called his wife Linda at around 4:30, telling her, "I'm putting dinner on." Totally routine, until it wasn't. That was the last time anyone heard his voice. When Linda came home around 6 p.m., the food was cooked, the oven was off, and everything in the house looked untouched. His coat, keys, wallet, and the family dog were all still there, but Will was gone. A neighbor's security camera showed a white SUV pulling up to his garage shortly before he disappeared. Police later identified it as belonging to a family member, but it didn't lead anywhere. Weeks later, investigators found traces of red inside the home. His nephew, the last person to see him, was named a person of interest, and he was arrested in 2020. He pled guilty and admitted to dumping his uncle's body. He was given a pretty lenient sentence of 11 years after making a plea deal. Tara Calico is a college student in Belen, New Mexico. She went for a morning bike ride on September 20th of 1988. Before leaving, she jokingly told her mom, "If I'm not back by noon, come looking for me." At the time, it just seemed like a passing comment, maybe because she'd had close calls with cars on that route before. This time though, she never came back. Her mom searched the area and found part of Tara's Walkman and a broken cassette tape along the road, but there were no signs of a crash or a struggle other than that. Weeks later, a photo turned up in a Florida parking lot. It showed a young woman and a boy both tied up and gagged. The woman resembled Tara, and some believe it really was her, but experts never agreed. And over the years, the case spiraled into one of the most well-known missing persons cases in the US. There were unconfirmed sightings, possible suspects, and even a sheriff's claim that she was killed by local teens and her body was hidden, but no hard evidence has ever come out. Marion Barter was a teacher in Australia who suddenly disappeared in 1997. She'd sold her house, said she was heading to England for a break, and stayed in contact with her family for a few weeks. But then one day she called her daughter from a payphone and ended the call with, "I'll call you back." She never did though. Then a cheerful voicemail turned up a few days later saying she was having tea in Tunbridge Wells. After that, nothing. Her bank account back in Australia started seeing large cash withdrawals though, all made in person, thousands of dollars gone, but Marion wasn't in Australia. At least no one thought she was. She never contacted her family again. There were no confirmed sightings, no passport records, no digital trail. Decades later, a podcast helped reignite public interest in the case though, and investigators opened a fresh inquiry. They discovered that Marion had changed her name before leaving, possibly to avoid being found by someone. Her daughter now believes that Marion may have been in danger, caught up in something she had no way of getting out of without taking on a new identity and running away. In August of 2018, a 21-year-old man named Matthew Weaver dropped a friend off after a night out and then drove into the mountains outside Malibu, California. The next morning, around sunrise, he posted a scenic photo to Snapchat, a wide, peaceful view of the Santa Monica Mountains. That was the last normal moment anyone can confirm. A few hours later, Matthew sent a string of unsettling messages to a friend saying, "Some crazy is going on," and more chillingly, "I just want to talk while I have the chance." No one heard from him after that. Hikers later reported hearing screams in the area though, and someone yelling, "He's got a gun." Matthew's car was found abandoned near a remote trail, but his keys and phone were gone. Months later, hikers discovered those same keys just 25 feet from the vehicle, along with a torn shirt and a hat believed to be his. Despite searches with helicopters, dogs, and drones, nothing else ever turned up. No sign of a body, no idea what he meant in his final texts. Maura Murray, a nursing student, vanished on February 9th of 2004. That day, Maura emailed her professors to say she'd been taking a week off from school due to a family emergency, but no one in her family was actually in distress. Then Maura packed her car with clothes and personal belongings and set off, telling a friend she was going to New Hampshire for a brief break, but Maura never made it to her destination. Her car was found crashed on a remote road. A passing motorist called 911, and when police arrived, they found the car was abandoned, but personal items, including her purse, were still inside. Maura had even left her cell phone behind. no trace of her has ever been found. Some think foul play may have been involved, others think that she could have staged her own disappearance, but the truth remains to be seen. Amy Lynn Bradley was 23 when she vanished from a cruise ship in the Caribbean in 1998. She'd been out drinking and dancing on the ship the night before, then returned to the cabin she shared with her family. Her brother Brad said they talked for a bit, and she told him "I love you" before she went to sleep. By morning, she was gone. The cabin door was left open, and there were a few early morning sightings of her walking on deck. After that, though, there was nothing. The ship docked and continued on its route. Amy never got off, but somehow she wasn't on board either. Over the years, there have been a number of possible sightings of Amy in Caribbean countries, including one woman who claimed that she saw her being forced into a car. Another claimed that Amy approached her in a bathroom and begged for help, saying she was being held against her will. None of these reports were confirmed, though, and no hard evidence ever came about. Amy's parents believe she was trafficked. Authorities haven't ruled it out, but after more than 25 years, we still don't have any solid answers.
Coming in at number 10 is Michael Rockefeller. Michael Rockefeller, the son of New York Governor Nelson Rockefeller, was 23 when he began dabbling in art collecting and travel photography. In November 1961, he traveled to the jungles of New Guinea to spend time with the native Asmat tribes when he went missing. Now, despite a 2-week search and a witness who supposedly saw him swimming in the ocean, his body was never found. His official cause of death was noted as drowning, but conspiracy theories range from being kidnapped to going native to even being eaten by sharks. Another big theory is that he was eaten by people, as the Asmat tribes were involved in that practice, and they sometimes ended people's lives as a part of rituals. It's also been said that his boat overturned near the Asmat region of the island, and he swam to shore to look for help, and that's when he was attacked, as nobody ever saw him again. There have been some members of local tribes who've told stories indicating that Michael's life was ended upon reaching the shore, and that his body was cut up and the parts were handed out as gruesome trophies. Regardless of how or what happened, it will forever remain a mystery. Number 9. Prime Minister Harold Holt. On December 17, 1967, Harold Holt, the Prime Minister of Australia, disappeared while swimming in the sea. His last photo of him is him actually swimming. He was with others and he knew the area well, and he had swum there many times before, but it seems like he swam into deeper water and was dragged out to sea. The others called out to him, but he did not raise his arms or cry for help. He soon slipped under the waves and was out of sight. The Victoria Police were contacted and initiated what became one of the largest search operations in Australian history. The entire Australian Defence Force was put on high alert, and an enormous search operation was mounted in and around the beach with helicopters, watercrafts, police divers, and 2 naval diving teams, and more than 340 people were involved in the search. Strangely, his body was never recovered, and it is generally agreed that his disappearance was a simple case of accidental drowning, but a number of conspiracy theories surfaced since. A 1968 story in the Sunday Observer claimed that Harold had been assassinated by the US Central Intelligence Agency, supposedly because he intended to pull Australia out of Vietnam. Also, suggestions were made that Harold had his life ended by the North Vietnamese after being incapacitated by a nerve agent, or that he had faked his own life to be with a lover. In 1983, British journalist Anthony Gray claimed that Harold was a lifelong spy for the People's Republic of China. According to Anthony, Harold faked his own death to defect to China and was collected by frogmen who dragged him into a waiting submarine. Yeah. Now, regardless of what actually happened to him, this disappearance was extremely strange, and it seems like we'll never get answers. Number 8. Bison Dele. Before he changed his name, Bison Dele was basketball player Brian Williams, a 6'11" mountain of a man who was an amazing player in the NBA. He then quit sports and soon left the States at age 30. He stayed away from the US for years, raising hell in Australia, where he learned to sail Powell and bought himself a boat named the Hakuna Matata. He decided he was going to sail it clear from Tahiti to Hawaii. On July 7, 2002, Bison set sail with his girlfriend Serena Carlin, the ship's captain Bertrand Saldo, and his older brother Miles DeBoard. The last known photo is of him and Serena on Bora Bora Beach. Now, unfortunately, the group never made it to Hawaii as Bison, his girlfriend, and the captain vanished at sea. 2 months later, though, his brother Miles was arrested in Phoenix trying to buy gold with one of his brother's checks. Released on bail, he ended his own life, and it was suspected that he ended the lives of all three on board the ship, as he was allegedly a bitter guy who was prone to violence and envied his brother's success. It's said he most likely ended their lives and dumped their bodies in the Pacific. Now, to this day, their bodies have never been found. Number 7. Hale Boggs. At the time he went missing, Hale Boggs was one of the most famous politicians in America. A Democrat from New Orleans, Hale had sat on the Warren Commission investigating JFK's assassination before becoming House Majority Leader during the Nixon years. He was thought to be an alcoholic, and he became famous for doubting the lone gunman theory in the JFK shooting. Now, Hale Boggs was kinda a big deal in 1972, hence the nationwide shock when he disappeared. On October 16th that year, he was in Alaska helping a fellow congressman's re-election bid. The two got on a light aircraft heading for remote Juneau, and they were never seen again. The weather was terrible that day, and as soon as Hale failed to show in Juneau, everyone guessed what had probably happened: they crashed. What was then the biggest search operation in US history was launched, with 90 planes searching 325,000 square miles of Alaska. But no trace of the missing aircraft or its occupants was ever found. To this day, there are some people out there who think Hale was assassinated for his work investigating the JFK assassination. Number 6. Scott Smith. Canadian band Loverboy was one of the biggest rock bands of the early 80s, and Scott Smith was a founding member, staying with the group all the way until his mysterious and frightening disappearance at sea on November 30th, 2000. After playing with his band in Vancouver, BC, Scott, two friends, and his girlfriend set out to Mexico on their 37-foot sailboat. As they sailed down the coast and neared San Francisco, the weather got rough, and one of them estimated that a wave to be around 20 feet high knocked Scott off the deck of the vessel and into the water. Coast Guard helicopters arrived within 20 minutes and dispatched 2 search boats, which scoured a 133 square mile area to no avail. When fog and continuing high waves ended that search, Scott's family paid for a private search by a San Francisco company, and that too proved fruitless. Now, to this day, his remains have never surfaced. Number 5. Joe Pitchler. In the late 90s and early 2000s, child and teen actor Joe Pitchler appeared in a series of small and supporting roles in a number of movies and TV shows, most notably as Brennan Newton in the Beethoven family film franchise. Now, according to the Charlie Project, Joe spoke with a friend at about 4 a.m. on January 5th, 2006, in his northeastern Washington hometown of Bremerton. A few weeks before his 19th birthday, he left his apartment untouched, unlocked, and with the lights on, and apparently only took his wallet and car keys before he disappeared without telling anyone where he might be going, apart from some poems that spoke to his depressing mindset. 4 days later, Joe's Toyota Corolla was located in Bremerton, and authorities suspected that Joe may have jumped to his death off a bridge over the Port Madison Narrows, but no evidence of that nor his remains were ever recovered. Number 4. Patrick McDermott. Patrick McDermott worked as a cinematographer on a handful of short films in the 2000s, but he was far more well known for his personal life, as he was involved romantically with Olivia Newton-John on and off. According to the Telegraph, Patrick was on board a Mexico-bound chartered fishing boat called the Freedom of California in June 2005, but didn't make it back with the ship. Philip Klein, a private investigator hired by the NBC investigative news show Dateline to find the 48-year-old cameraman, theorized in 2009 that Patrick faked his death and vanished as to cancel out substantial debts and to allow his son to cash in on a $150,000 life insurance insurance policy. Philip firmly believed that Patrick was alive, citing 17 credible reported sightings, many of them from Cabo San Lucas, Mexico, the last place Patrick was seen alive. Now, according to the CBC, another investigation ruled that Patrick had likely drowned in the Pacific Ocean. However, in November 2017, the Australian magazine New Idea and other tabloids published pictures purporting to be Patrick alive and well, but a Canadian man named Wes Staub refuted that claim, proving that he was the guy in the photos, not Patrick. So, is he well and alive? No one seems to know. Number 3. Amelia Earhart. In the 1930s, Amelia Earhart was an American hero and one of the most famous people on the planet. In 1932, according to the National Women's History Museum, Amelia became the first woman to fly across the Atlantic Ocean unaccompanied, and she was awarded the Cross of the French Legion of Honor and the American Distinguished Flying Cross, among other achievements. In 1937, she set out on a journey that would prove ambitious and mysterious. She aimed to be the first woman to fly all the way around the globe. Alongside her navigator Fred Noonan, she departed Miami on June 1st, and by July 2nd they made it to New Guinea with plans to hit Howland Island, a small uninhabited landmass between Hawaii and Australia. Now, sometime en route, Amelia, dealing with poor weather and low fuel, lost contact with a Coast Guard liaison. Her plane never landed and it was never discovered, nor were Amelia or Fred, despite a giant Coast Guard and Navy search effort that encompassed 250,000 square miles. Now, her last photo was done by a photo shoot she did days before she disappeared. Number 2. Richey Edwards. Manic Street Preachers guitarist and songwriter Richey Edwards disappeared without a trace in February 1995 when he was 27 years old. He was due to fly to the United States on a promotional tour of the Holy Bible. Although there were several theories about his disappearance, his highly publicized drug and alcohol use led people at the time to believe that he died by taking his own life, but the investigation itself has received criticism. In his 1999 book, Everything, a Book About Manic Street Preachers, Simon Price states that aspects of the investigation were far from satisfactory. He asserts that police may not have taken Edwards' mental state into account when prioritizing his disappearance, and also records Edwards' sister Rachel as having hit out at police handling after CCTV footage was analyzed 2 years after Edwards vanished. Price records a member of the investigation team as stating that the idea you could identify someone from that is errant nonsense. While his family had the option of declaring him legally dead from 2002 onwards, they chose not to for many years, and his status remained open as a missing person until November 23, 2008, when he officially became presumed dead, but according to the police, Edwards is still considered a missing person. And coming in at number 1 is Sean Flynn. Photojournalist Sean Flynn went missing while abroad in the 70s. Sean, who was 28 at the time, and a group of journalists were in Ho Chi Minh City, then called Saigon, for a government press conference when a fellow reporter claimed he got a tip that the Viet Cong, a communist movement and United Front organization, were nearby. According to reports, Sean and photographer Dana Stone chose to travel on motorcycles instead of the limousines that the majority of the other journalists were using for traveling. Now, reporter Steve Bell took the last known photo of the pair as they decided to walk on foot near the forest line where the checkpoint was to check it out, and the pair were never seen again. Now, 4 other international journalists were kidnapped by the Viet Cong on the same day, April 6, 1970, but Sean and Dana were never found. His mother spent a lot of her fortune searching for her son, who was legally declared dead in 1984.
So the first photo we're taking a look at is this one here. On February 3rd of 1959, musicians J.P. Richardson, also known as the Big Bopper, Richie Valens, and Buddy Holly tragically died in a plane crash near Clear Lake, Iowa, in what is famously known as the day the music died. This is the last photo taken of the 3 before boarding their final flight. The musicians had been traveling on a small Beechcraft Bonanza airplane, chartered after their tour bus broke down. The plane, piloted by Roger Peterson, took off from the Mason City Municipal Airport en route to Hector Airport in Fargo, North Dakota. The weather conditions on the night of the crash crash were poor, with a combination of snow, sleet, and fog, and despite these conditions, the flight took off anyway. The plane crashed only a few minutes after takeoff, around 1 a.m., into a cornfield near Clear Lake. There were no survivors. If you like videos just like this, creepy paranormal stuff, cryptid stuff, ghost stuff, we got it all, so hit that subscribe button and don't miss out. Next on the list is the 1943 glider crash. This is the last photograph taken of William D. Becker, the former mayor of St. Louis, along with several other prominent men in the community, right after boarding a brand new Waco CG-4 glider, manufactured by William B. Robertson, also pictured here. This was going to be the first public demonstration of the aircraft taking flight. Spectators watched from Lampert St. Louis Airport as the men boarded the glider. What they didn't know was that they were witnessing the last moments of these men's lives. The glider was taxied by a plane to a runway for takeoff. They took flight, and once ready to allow the glider to glide, the towing cable was released. Almost immediately after the glider was released, though, something terrifying happened. Its right wing completely snapped off. Now, a wing snapping off of an aircraft spells disaster no matter what type of aircraft it is, but keep in mind these gliders were engineless, created specifically for the war efforts to be released like this and then glide down, usually into enemy lines. So now completely on its own and missing a wing, there was no way for it to make a safe landing. It just plummeted towards the earth, crashing into the ground. All 10 men aboard died on impact. Next up, we have the death of Robert Overacker. Robert Overacker was a daredevil from Camarillo, California. At 12:35 p.m. October 1st, he attempted to go over Niagara Falls on a jet ski with the intention of raising awareness about the homeless. And during his attempt, Overacker wore a life jacket and was carrying a flag promoting a charity for the homeless. He had also intended to deploy a parachute at the last moment to escape the fall, but the parachute didn't deploy and he plunged over the falls. This photo was taken just as he went over. He was only 39 years old. Number 7, George, Mallory, and Sandy Irvine. On June 8th, 1924, British mountaineers George Mallory and Andrew Sandy Irvine went missing on Mount Everest during their attempt to reach the summit. Mallory and Irvine were part of the British 1924 Mount Everest expedition led by General Charles Bruce. The pair were last seen by their fellow climber Noel Odell at an elevation of around 28,000 feet on the northeast ridge of the mountain. The weather on Everest that day was unstable, very overcast with snow making for low visibility. After Mallory and Irvine failed to return to their camp, search parties were sent out, but no trace of them was found. Several expeditions in the following years attempted to locate Mallory and Irvine's remains and their camera, hoping to find clues about whether they reached the summit, but it wasn't until 1999 that Mallory's body was discovered on the north face of the mountain. The last photo snapped of them was taken by Noel Odell right before they began their ascent. Japan Airlines Flight 123, a Boeing 747, crashed on August 12th of 1985, taking the lives of 520 of the 524 people on board. The crash was caused by severe structural failure, which led to a rapid decompression and loss of control. The last photo recovered from the crash site was taken by one of the passengers on the flight. In the photo, passengers can be seen wearing oxygen masks. The accident was caused by the rupture of the aircraft's rear pressure bulkhead, which separated the pressurized cabin from the unpressurized tail section. The bulkhead had been improperly repaired after a tail strike incident 7 years earlier. And the failure of the rear pressure bulkhead led to a sudden and explosive decompression inside the cabin. Decompression caused damage to control cables and systems, making it almost impossible for the pilots to maintain control of the plane. The craft eventually entered a rapid descent and crashed into a mountain range. There were actually more than 4 passengers who survived the initial crash, but they died after several hours waiting to be rescued. Japan Airlines Flight 123 crash is one of the deadliest single aircraft accidents in aviation history. Number 5, Snake Man. This is the last photo taken of Ali Khan Samsudin. He was known as the Snake King after he spent 12 hours a day for 40 days living with 400 cobras in a small room. He also stayed in a small glass enclosure with 6,000 scorpions for 21 days, earning him the title Scorpion King. His 2006 performance in Kuala Lumpur would sadly be his last, though. During his show, he was bitten by a king cobra, one of the deadliest snakes in the world, with venom powerful enough to take down a full-sized elephant in a matter of hours. Samsudin had been bitten before. He'd even suffered a couple cobra bites before and made it out alive, but this time he didn't recover. His condition just got worse and worse, and the Snake King died in the hospital 3 days later. Next, we have the last photo of Maya Naseka. Maya Naseka was a nurse in Zaire, now the Democratic Republic of Congo, during the 1976 Ebola outbreak. She contracted the Ebola virus while treating patients at Mambalad Hospital in Kinshasa. She caught the virus while treating a nun who had been flown in from Yambuku Mission Hospital, where the initial outbreak began. Naseka's case became widely known as she was one of the earliest identified healthcare workers to be infected during the outbreak. And in this photo, you see her standing with another nurse tending to a patient. She died just a few days after this picture was taken. The nurses weren't given the proper protective equipment, and there hadn't been any proper precautions taken to prevent contact with the nun's blood or fluids, because at the time, it wasn't known just how deadly the virus really was. Next up, we have the 1961 US figure skating team. This is the last photo of the US figure skating team, which was taken at the airport shortly before they boarded Sabina Flight 548. In the photo, team members appeared in high spirits, smiling, posing for the camera. Little did they know that this would be the last moment captured before the tragic event that claimed their lives. On February 15th of 1961, Sabina Flight 548, a Boeing 707 aircraft, crashed while attempting to land at Brussels Airport in Belgium. The plane was carrying the entire team, along with coaches, officials, and other passengers. The crash resulted in the tragic loss of 72 people on board. The cause of the crash never been 100% determined, but the most likely cause was a failure in the plane's flap system combined with poor weather conditions. The pilot struggled to maintain control during the landing attempt, leading to the deadly accident. Alright, next up we have the last photo of Christopher McCandless. On September 6th, 1992, the decomposing body of Christopher McCandless was found in a bus he had been living in just outside of Denali National Park in Alaska. McCandless had embarked on a journey to leave civilization behind and live off the grid. He spent 113 days living off the land, using the bus as his shelter. His journal entries were discovered, and it was likely he died about 19 days before his body was discovered. After living in the bus for over 3 months, McCandless finally decided he was going to try and make his way back to civilization. But this was unfortunately not going to be as easy as he thought. The river he had crossed to reach the bus was now much higher and swifter than it was when he first ventured in. He decided to turn back, left an SOS note on the bus reading, "Attention possible visitors, SOS, I need your help. I'm injured, near death, and too weak to hike out. I'm all alone. This is no joke. In the name of God, please remain to save me. I'm collecting berries close by and shall return this evening. Thank you, Chris McCandless." McCandless succumbed to starvation while waiting for help that never arrived. When his body was discovered, he appeared extremely gaunt, reportedly weighing only around 60 pounds at the time of his death. And finally, we have Princess Diana. This photo was taken by paparazzi in August of 1997 in Paris. Pictured here is Princess Diana, Dottie Fade, her driver Henry Paul, and bodyguard Trevor Rees-Jones, right before a fatal car accident. Rees-Jones was the only survivor. Princess Diana and Dottie Fade were in a romantic relationship. They had been vacationing together in the French Riviera when they were pursued by paparazzi. As they left the Ritz Hotel in Paris, their car was chased by paparazzi photographers on motorcycles trying to capture images of the couple. In the Pont d'Alma tunnel, the car lost control and slammed into a concrete pillar. The impact of the crash was severe, leading to the deaths of Princess Diana and the other two in the car. Of course, the bodyguard did survive though. The aggressive pursuit by the paparazzi was widely criticized. Some people blamed them for indirectly causing the accident due to their relentless chase, something that I definitely agree with. I hate paparazzi. Like, just come on, get a real job, honestly.